Story 1, Suspiria. I can still hear them. In the stillness of the night as I wait for the grasp of sleep to take me, the sighs start flooding in from all directions. At first, they're so low that I think I must be imagining them, but gradually they get louder. Eventually, the only thing I can think about are those damn sighs. They echo in my ears, each one dry and riddled with years of pain and suffering. I'll lie in bed in agony until sleep finally pulls me from the hell that has taken over my life. I've learned to cherish these few brief moments of rest. They've started to become even fewer and further in between. The daytime is almost just as bad. Whether it be in the confines of my office or highly trafficked supermarket aisles, I hear them. They're not nearly as loud as during the night, but still loud enough for me to barely notice them. It's become more and more difficult to keep my sanity in check during these instances. I'm not sure what's worse, being bombarded by them during the night or being driven mad by their faintness during the day. The past few days have been spent fearing the moment when whatever is making these horrid sighs finally drags me down to whatever hellish domain it resides in. I suppose the best place to start off is how I got into this mess. When my grandmother passed away, she left me her house. Most people would consider this a blessing, but I thought of it as more of a curse. During the last few years of her life, she barely had enough money to pay her bills. Because of this, the house had fallen into a horrible state of disrepair. The roof had leaked and destroyed most of the ceiling and drywall in the 2 bedrooms upstairs. The first floor was even worse. The wallpaper had finally begun to peel after years of neglect, and all the furniture had been bleached by the sun. After many days of persuasion, my fiancé finally agreed to helping me with the renovation. We figured that fixing the house ourselves, compared to hiring a contractor, would save us a considerably great amount of money. The first day was absolutely misery. The air conditioner went out, and the blistering heat of the Louisiana summer turned the house into a sweltering inferno. Even with fans running in almost every window, our clothes were soaked with sweat by the end of the day. Why? Since every shower head had long since been plugged with minerals from the water, we took turns outside holding the hose for each other. The nearest neighbor was nearly half a mile down the road, so we had no reason to worry about someone seeing us that night. With just the bare studs of the downstairs walls remaining, we slept on a mattress in the living room. Although not the most ideal situation, neither of us felt like driving the 45 minutes back to our apartment. The next morning, we woke up bright and early to finish the demolition upstairs. There's not a moment that goes by when I don't regret opening up the walls in that bedroom. I can still remember that day with every painstaking detail. Up until that point, everything had been going perfectly according to plan. We were relieved to finally be rid of the drywall that still gave off the smell of cigarettes. As my fiancé took a drywall hatchet to the yellowed wall and tore it open, the room was flooded with an odor. The smell of decades of rot and decay filled the room and invaded my nostrils. At first I thought a squirrel or some other vermin had gotten trapped in the cavity of the wall and died, but this wretched odor seemed too strong to be from a small mammal. With shirts pulled over our noses, we tore away the rest of the drywall to find the source of the stink. as he tore down a large section. Something slumped from behind the wall and dangled in front of us through the opening. Hanging before our very eyes was the dried corpse of a little girl. The eyes had since rotted away, leaving to dark pits staring right at us. Her mouth hung open with yellow teeth set in a crooked jaw. The clumps of hair still remaining on her head had dried out to the point where it looked like black straw. Her skin, however, is the detail burned into my memory the most. It had aged into a sickly gray color and stretched taut over the bones of her small frame. I stood motionless in stunned silence. My fiancé, however, reached into his pocket and immediately pulled out his phone to dial the police. While he yelled into his phone, I stood in horrified silence as his sunlight flooding into the room highlighted every nauseating detail of her body. Within a matter of minutes, a swarm of police cars cluttered the yard in front of the house. The two of us were kept in the kitchen and asked questions while the girl's body was removed from the wall. As my shaking hand struggled to grasp my cup of coffee, I watched two men slowly walk down our IRS with her body in a black canvas bag. Although we had long since left the upstairs bedroom, I swore at that moment that I could still smell the stench of rot. That night, my fiancé and I discussed how to proceed with the situation at hand. We both knew that selling this house would be an impossibility. It would be spread all over the town by morning that the body of a little girl had been discovered in our walls. Selling this house would mean taking a huge loss on the resale value. We were already struggling to keep our heads above water financially, and that option would be like wearing cement shoes. In the end, we had no choice but to finish the remodel, have the local priest bless the house, and hope that, with time, this whole ordeal would eventually die down. I got a call from the police station the following afternoon. I was informed that the girl was, in fact, a resident of this house over 70 years ago. After days of digging through old papers and records, it was discovered her name was Elizabeth Harper. She had been diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1942, leaving her bedridden. The last information the police managed to find on her was a missing persons report dated on July 17, 1946. In the report, her father stated that Elizabeth had finally started to recover from the feeling it would be in her best interest. The family took a trip to a nearby park for fresh air. It was at this park the father claimed Elizabeth wandered off during their lunch. Despite days of searching, her body was never recovered. Her body had been taken to the coroner's office for an examination. According to the pathologist, he believed the girl had likely been poisoned. Typically, tuberculosis causes death by the uncontrolled inflation of the individual's cells, but he reported he could find no trace of this. It was at this moment I realized what had happened to Elizabeth. As if guided by some unknown force, my mind pieced everything together. Elizabeth never left this house that day. After years of caring for her and listening to her painful breathing, Elizabeth's father finally snapped. He knew there was only one way to end the suffering that had engulfed his life. I don't believe she was poisoned. I believe she was smothered. Every night and every day I can hear Elizabeth just like her father once did. After this prolonged exposure to the hellish sounds, I finally realize what I'm hearing. I'm not just hearing her struggle to take in a breath. I am hearing her gasping for air with what little strength she has, as her father holds a pillow over her face. Even now, the image of a father killing his own daughter still burning in my mind's eye. I've tried becoming accustomed to it these past few days, but my efforts are fruitless. That's why I've decided it's finally time to end all this. I'm going to assume that whoever is reading these papers, you're either a police officer, firefighter, or ambulance medic who found my body in the field adjacent to the property. Don't bother staying here to investigate anything. Lines save you the trouble and admit to setting the house on fire before taking my own life. My actions in no way guarantee that I have cleansed this world of the evil which has plagued my existence these past few weeks. As much as I hope and pray that it will be gone, there's no certainty. My fiancé has gone into town to drink with some friends. Apparently, these ghastly sighs have not been affecting him. When I attempted to talk to him about my experiences, he simply denoted it to exhaustion. Why they have chosen me as their sole victim I may never know. I love you, Scott. I hope that, with time, you come to understand that what I am about to do is justified in its own demented way. I have doused the rugs and carpet with gasoline and poured a considerable amount into the whole empty bedroom upstairs. As the putrid fumes filled the air, I could still smell the rot emitting from the wall. Currently, I am sitting at the kitchen table writing all this. A book of matches is hitting to one side of me and a candle to the other. Once I am done, I shall light this wretched dwelling ablaze and finally end my suffering. I want to shoot myself in the yard with these papers in hand, so that whoever finds my body will have an explanation for all of this. If there is a heaven, I hope I go there. If I go to hell, there's no possibility can be worse than the constant torture and agony these sighs have created for me. Soon I shall finally have the blissful sound of silence. Wherever I end up, I just hope Elizabeth is not there with me. Story 2. Ocellari. In my room, on my desk, sits a black plastic casing which holds my glasses. They have a power of -9 and they were very expensive to wear. When I was younger, my mother used to warn me about sitting too close to the television. She used to tell me that my eyesight would get progressively worse and I'd either end up needing glasses or my eyes would simply be bad enough to make me legally blind. Being an overly obnoxious 9-year-old, I never listened to her, so whenever my favorite cartoon or TV show was on, I would scurry to the living room and rest my head an inch away from the screen. I figured that the closer I got to the TV, the closer I could get to the show. Whenever my mother found out about this, she would yell at me about how expensive glasses would be and that we couldn't afford even a single pair. She'd then proceed to slap the back of my head so hard that I would accidentally bite my tongue or unpleasantly acquaint my face with the hardy TV screen. It happened every time and I always ignored her until one day she got to say I told you so, and we were forced to get me a pair of glasses because we couldn't afford to buy new ones. She took me all over the neighborhood to find a used pair that did the job well enough, and so it continued until my eyes settled at a power of -9. Finding a used pair of glasses that would suffice was hell. We eventually spotted a proper pair at an antique store. The store was filled with objects and trinkets that could have come straight out of a horror movie. Most of it, including the elderly woman who was sitting behind the counter, looked fit for use by witches. The woman was wearing sunglasses that were much too dark for the dusky little store. My mother asked how much they would cost, and the woman simply replied, "Very expensive." She seemed to be blind because she never looked at my mother while they spoke about the price, but she stared intently at me, Eve, and as we left the store I could tell that she was following me with her gaze. It made the hairs on my neck stand on end. Despite being very ugly, the glasses did the trick. She had to work 7 days a week for months in order to earn back what it had cost, but at least my eyesight didn't seem to get any worse. Needless to say that my glasses were a necessity. Without them I was essentially a baby in a suit. I had to look out for every little thing so as not to break or otherwise damage this life-saving piece of technology. Eventually, my girlfriend and I grew tired of having to always watch out for my glasses, and so, after a lot of coercing, she managed to talk me into getting laser eye surgery. I can't say that I've ever regretted making that choice. It was wonderful seeing things perfectly clear again without wearing my glasses. At first, the discomfort was horrible, but eventually it faded and I got my perfect eyesight back. I felt like a new man, reborn with the eyes of a god. I'm a sentimental idiot, and so I never managed to throw my old glasses away. Months and years passed until one day, when we were packing our stuff because we were moving to a new town, I stumbled upon the old plastic casing of my massively expensive glasses. Holding them again after such a long time felt strangely nostalgic. They were once incredibly important to me, enabling me to live like a reasonably average human being. I may have actually shed a small tear or two, and in my nostalgia I wanted to wear them again, even if just for a little while. Looking through old glasses, if you don't need them, is bad for your eyes, but I figured a quick peek wouldn't hurt too much. The moment the pads rested on my nose, and the temple tips nestled gently behind my ear, as I could feel something wrong. My eyesight wasn't distorted at all, despite what I'd expected. In fact, when I think back, it might have actually improved marginally, naturally, as any sane person would. I was confused, and I wanted to take them off to reassure myself that my eyesight was still perfect without them. But they wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled, and I pulled really hard. I can assure you the pads stayed perfectly still on my nose, and the entire damn thing wouldn't move so much as a millimeter. At this point, I was freaking the hell out. I called out to my girlfriend, who had been in the kitchen packing our cutlery and plates and such, but she didn't reply. At first I figured she must have not heard me, so I launched myself out of the chair I'd been sitting in, wanting to make my way to the kitchen with all sorts of haste. Beyond the door, however, was a desolate, empty house where only moments before a vibrant new home of a loving couple had been. The previously white wallpaper was filled with holes and patches of mold, and it slanted away from the wall as if it had grown tired of its own existence. Behind the wallpaper were cracks in the wall, as if the house had been abandoned for 100 years. The wooden floor beneath my feet creaked so much I feared it would cave in, and the roof above my head was already partially on the floor. Through the holes in the roof I could see the sky. Clouds roll over each other, as if at war with themselves, and in the distance I could see the sun rising, leaving a blood-red stain on the deck of clouds as it pierced through them like a knife through soft flesh. I called her name again, suddenly fearing for her life. My legs were trembling, but they obeyed me and moved faster than they had before. When I finally made it to the kitchen, it was as empty and decayed as the rest of the house had been. The stench of rot and decay penetrated my nose, and my gag reflex automatically SETN. Panic and fear mixed in my stomach, and I ran out of the house into a world that was completely and utterly dead. There were no people, no animals, no plants. There was no sound other than made by the wind. I was completely alone in a place that seemed to be rotten and saturated with death. My fear fueled my adrenaline, and with all the strength in my arms I pulled at the glasses, but they still would not move. I closed my eyes, took several deep breaths, and then punched the contraption of plastic and metal and glass that had glued itself to my face and was showing me the end of the world. I punched until I couldn't feel my face, and my knuckles were raw. Her gasp is what woke me up. She was standing in the doorway with a horrified look on her face, as if her worst nightmare was coming true. It filled me with worrying, but the sight of her dampened my fears with love and relief. I crawled to my feet, wanting to wrap her in my arms and hold her. I wanted to make sure that this was real and that she was safe, but she shied away from me as if she feared that I would attack her. Her eyes briefly darted over me before feverishly fixating on my face. Again, I reached out to her again, hoping that she would understand that I wanted to hold her in my arms, but those very arms were covered all over with a red, sticky wetness. I felt no pain, so that must mean it was someone else's blood. Disgust and terror gripped my heart, and I frantically ran my eyes over her entire body while she stood frozen in the doorway. The only thought going through my mind was, did I hurt her? Is she all right? And I wanted to tell her that I had no memory of whatever had happened, and that I would make sure that everything would be okay. No sound came from my mouth. It was as if there was an emptiness in my throat that swallowed all sound I was trying to produce. I tried talking again, but all I could hear was a low gurgling coming from the back of my throat, followed by the horrific scream that came from the woman I loved. She turned on her heels and bolted away. I started chasing her, ignoring the wet, disgusting feeling on the rest of my body that I had finally become aware of. The stickiness didn't matter. All that mattered to me was to tell her that everything was going to be okay, that I loved her, and that we would make it through this if we stuck together. She reached the front door, pulled it open, and ran out before slamming it shut behind her with such a force that it rattled the mirrors in the hallway. I passed them by and glanced briefly from the corners of my eyes, except there were no eyes. Two caves of rotting flesh stared back at me, oozing blood that crawled down my face and stained my clothes a dark, filthy red. My mouth opened in horror, but that only made it worse. In my mouth was an emptiness. My tongue had been cut out, and the same disgusting blood was bubbling up and over my shredded lips. I wanted to scream, but I was met with nothing but a gurgle. I stood still for minutes, staring at the horrific creature in the mirror. Its hollow, bleeding eye sockets stared back at me, and in the far reaches of my mind I wondered how that could be. How could I see without eyes? But then I remembered an old woman who wore sunglasses in a gloomy store, as if she were blind, and my mind made the connection. Back in my room, on my desk, sits a black plastic casing which held my old glasses. They had a power of -9 and were very, very expensive to wear. Story 3. At the roots of the roses. When I was young, I was told my mother committed suicide by jumping from a bridge. Her body wasn't found, as the river she landed in led to the sea, and many bodies of the people that went missing in it weren't ever recovered. My mental health was understandably not the best, as I was only 17, and even though I wasn't the perfect child and would often have fallouts with my mother, I loved her despite my recklessness. Looking back, I understand that she had a few demons, but no one could really have thought it would lead her to do something like that. Since I was a child, I've had a love for flowers, and especially roses, which was what helped me get back to a normal life again. A few miles from the city we lived in was a farm that grew roses. I'd drop out of college to take a job working with producing and selling the roses that grew there. The place was quite the only thing the city had to brag about, as it was often said to have some of the best roses in the state. I, for one, absolutely adored them. There were huge fields with only roses for hundreds of meters, and most of them had a wonderful pink color, or the farm grew different colors, red and yellow as well as pink. But I liked the pink ones most, and they were also the ones that sold the most. Anyhow, I want to describe my first day working there. I'd applied to the job with the help of my psychologist, who had gone out of her ways to help me on the way to happiness. I still appreciate her efforts greatly. We were both so glad when the company got back to me and agreeing to give me the job. I took my bike and cycled out there as fast as I could, and I remember how tired my legs felt. I got there early, which seemed to be appreciated by my new boss. He smiled at me, and for the first time in months I felt all warm and fuzzy inside, which was a great contrast to the emptiness that had resided within me previously. I was so happy about getting to work there I barely even noticed that he touched the pendant of my necklace that I'd been wearing. My mother had made matching pendants for us when I was a kid, and since she'd gone I had been wearing mine all the time. I didn't even take it off when I slept or bathed. The necklace felt like the only thing left of my mother that I owned. My mother's necklace had gone with her. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have been wearing hers instead. I was a bit taken aback by his course of action, yet I tried not to think about it too much, and I soon forgot about it. My co-workers were all nice, and I soon made friends with a guy named Nick. He was 25 and had worked on the farm since he was 23, mostly because it paid the rent. He used to be quite the Diane, and his dream was to become a chef and own a restaurant. When I asked him why he didn't choose to apply to a job in a restaurant or a cafe downtown, he would shrug it off. I stopped asking him as the question clearly made him uncomfortable. After some time, I learned that my boss was not the owner of the company. It was a lady named Alexandra. She looked much younger than she was, and the Rose Farm had been in her family since the early 20th century. Nick told me everything he knew. It was Alexandra's great-grandfather that had started the business, and whatever he'd done to make the roses so perfect was a secret he'd guarded with his life. That was exactly what his children and grandchildren had done after him, as they all kept their mouths tightly shut about the issue. Alexandra was a very beautiful woman. She had pale skin and icy blue eyes. Her brown hair was always in a tight bun, and every time many of us workers met with her she would wear dark clothing. Everything about her gave a sense of respect, and we were all nervous when she came to observe our work. Nick and I were both sure that Alexandra and our boss, Mr. Verne, were in a relationship because they seemed to be so close. Nowadays, I really couldn't care less. I'm just happy that they're both dead. It was in the early summer that things where the truth was uncovered, the truth that had been hidden in the ground for generations, and that had kept getting fed more and more. Not many people think about it, but roses often get entangled with each other out on tea fields, and it's not always easy to notice because the fields are so large. My co-workers and I had gone out to check to be sure this hadn't happened, so that when we harvested the roses, we wouldn't have to throw any of them away because they'd grown all over each other. I was walking in a pretty slow pace, my eyes moving around as I looked over the roses. They had just started blooming, and their scent was heavy and completely surrounded me. Nick was further away. I could only see him as a figure in the distance to my right. The sun had started moving toward the horizon, and I Washington intended to try and get back before it got dark. It was significantly colder, and I shivered in my work clothes. When I think back, I can't remember hearing any other sounds than my own footsteps and breathing, which was a bit unnerving. A bit further away, I suddenly spotted a big bushy mess of entangled stems, leaves, and flowers. I hurried my pace up a bit and got some of the tools I'd brought with me out. The thorns were sharp and hurt a bit even through the gloves I had on my hands. Yet I started cutting the stems as I'd grown to be quite good at. I was careful not to harm the roses or the stems that led to the flowers. I had gotten through about half of the bush when I spotted something odd in the ground. Close to where I had my knee, something white was sticky, up through the ground. Only a small bit of it was visible, but big enough to notice. It didn't look like a rock, and my curiosity got the better of me. I put my tools down and backed you a little so that I could start digging the thing up. I put my fingers in the ground as close to it as I could and began to shove the earth to the sides. The object was a bit rounded, and as soon as I could, I started to pull it out of the ground. I eventually pulled it out and was completely dumbfounded. I didn't realize what it was at first, but when I understood, I felt sick. I had pulled a big bone out of the earth. I immediately signaled Nick and begged him to come over to my location. It felt like ages until he came, and I showed him the bone. It's probably from an animal, he said. I wasn't convinced. So we started digging more, and it soon became apparent to us that it wasn't just any kind of animal. Nick pulled out a human skull. As soon as he saw what it was, he immediately dropped it with fear in his eyes. I felt tears welling up in mine, and I watched as Nick started to rip the roses out, pulling the roots out as well. Out of the ground came many other bones. They were of different sizes and colors, and Nick hastily moved out to pull even more of the plants from different locations around us. Out, we found bones in most of the places. Terrified, we hurried back. I was behind Nick and I struggled to keep the pace. The landscape around us was bathed in the light of the sunset. The roses were in every direction, and I feared to even look at the ground because of that. I nearly tripped. Many times I was terrified of getting left behind, and I was sure I would if I didn't keep up. When we came back, we called the police, and I tried to describe the situation. I was panicking, and Nick had to take over. After that, we alerted all our co-workers, and we tried to find Alexandra and Mr. Verne, but they weren't in our offices. When the police showed up, we were taken back into the city for questioning as the police searched for Alexandra and her accomplice. Later that night, we were informed that they had become the prime suspects of huge amounts of murders. It wasn't exactly that way, because after confessing, Alexandra also told police how the murders and placements of the bodies dated back decades. Her great-grandfather had started the business. His idea had been to give the flowers the bodies of hundreds of people, and many years later she had sworn to keep it going. The farm had been his life, she said. Her pretty words hadn't helped her or Mr. Verne from the death sentence, however. Their executions were two of the quickest in America back then. It took only about a year and a half before they were condemned with lethal injection. Alexandra's last meal was a glass of water with a pink rose from her own farm floating on top. Mr. Verne was much less dramatic than the mastermind, but what keeps me up at night the most isn't any of this or how my old friend Nick looks nowadays. Not the torn man he has become, no. The thought that scares me, the fact that is my worst fear, is what the police gave me after they closed the case. It was a necklace with a handmade pendant, the exact same as the one I had around my neck. A pendant I'd seen so many times before. Story 4. Don't Take My Doll. It was July the 2nd, 1998, when she first appeared. A slight, pale woman with large black rings around her eyes, thin, hollow cheekbones, and hair like matted wire. I watched from the front desk every day as she flitted up to the window, stared into the police station, and repeatedly tapped her bony fingers against the glass. I'd been drafted to the small seaside town of Gentry less than a month ago, and not a day had gone by without the woman appearing at the window, sometimes for hours on end. I'd asked a couple of my superiors what she was doing, but they merely avoided my eyes and told me not to pry into private affairs. Today was no different. The woman crept over to the window and danced her fingers across the glass. The sky outside grew dark as the hours dragged on, and I watched as the first drops of rain fell from the sky. This light drizzle quickly progressed into a downpour, and I observed as the woman went from being doused to being drenched in a matter of minutes. Yet her movements didn't cease, and she continued to tap fervently on the window, her hollow, maddeningly wide eyes fixed on me the entire time. When her hair began to literally melt out of its precarious bun, I pushed back my chair and walked over to the door. I hesitated for a moment, glancing tentatively behind me to make sure that all eyes were averted. Quickly, I wrenched open the door and stuck my head outside and called, "Hey, do you want to come inside until the weather calms down?" The woman froze and snapped her head toward me. I was startled by her movement. The angle of her head made it appear that she possessed no spine to speak of, and instead that her head was disconnected from her neck. A near complete rotation without her moving her shoulders. I couldn't suppress a shiver as she twisted her body to align with her head and began to creep towards me, her arms lying limp at her sides. I stepped aside to allow her inside, and she twisted at her head and that inhuman state to face me. We stood like that for a few painfully long seconds before she whispered, "I have a crime to report." Her voice was delicate and childlike, as though encased within the putrescent gray skin, and the draggled hair lay a sweet child with pink ribbons scattered in her blonde ringlets. "Of course, ma'am," I smiled, gesturing for her to follow me to the front desk. I'd barely taken a step before she clasped her fingers around my wrist, her cold skin creating a crushing vice that stopped me in my tracks. "Please, sir, could we go to tea?" "The back room?" Her question surprised me, but I could understand why some witnesses would be too scared to declare crimes in the open. I had never heard of any witnesses being relocated to an actual room in the time I'd spent at the station, but the itching desire to know more about the woman prompted me to nod and change course. Heading down a long, thin corridor leading to the tiny back room, as we walked I stole a glance back at her and noticed that she was a fair deal younger than I'd first assumed. Her slender limbs, hunched figure, and dark eyes made it appear that she was an elderly woman, but on closer inspection, her undeveloped physique and halting in the nick of time, I fumbled my keys before unlocking the room and stepping inside. The room was comprised of dark metal walls and a concrete floor complete with a stainless steel table and 2 chairs. I took the chair closest to the door and waited for the girl to sit down. I pulled out a recording tape from my bag and set it on the table. "Okay," I smiled, "go ahead." The girl's dark eyes stared into my brown ones, and she let her jaw grow slack. After a moment, however, it began like every other day. The sun rose, the tide ebbed from the shore, and the seaside town stuttered into life. However, this day was special. Wait a second, please," I interrupted. "You don't have to tell it like this, like a story. I mean, you can just tell me the key elements and I can submit a report." She fixed me with her intense stare and replied, "But this is how it goes." "I have to tell the story how it goes," I sighed and waved her on. "Not in the mood to argue with a child." She continued, "It was a special day because it happened to be the birthday of the mayor's daughter, Cecilia Abigail Townsend H. A mother had promised Cecilia that she could ask for anything she wanted, so the little girl had replied a doll. So Cecilia's mother went searching for the most beautiful china doll in the two. When she looked in quaint boutiques and upmarket department stores, but she found no doll worthy of her beautiful daughter. Finally, she found a little girl playing on the street, a cherubic doll clutched in her hands. She begged and pleaded with the girl to part with the doll, but the child would have none of it. As the child played on, steely clouds rolled in from the ocean, threatening a storm. Finally, the girl set the doll on a nearby bench while she went to fetch an umbrella from her house, which lay only a few yards from where she was playing. Taking her chance, the mother snatched the doll from the bench and ran home, not stopping once along the way. She arrived home and wrapped the doll before presenting it to the delighted Cecilia at night. Cecilia, however, received a great number of presents at night, and the little doll was forgotten amongst the onslaught of gifts. Cecilia bade her parents good night and left for bed as the moon rose in the sky. Her father soon followed her, but her mother was left to clean up the mess that the wrapping paper had created. It was only when she had completely tidied the kitchen that she noticed the doll sitting on Cecilia's chair, its lassie eyes staring straight ahead. Cecilia's mother had been sure that the doll had been discarded under the table earlier, and no one had repositioned it on the chair, unless it had somehow climbed up there itself. Scared by her own musings, Cecilia's mother switched off the lights and retired for the night. When the clock struck midnight, Cecilia Abigail Townsend awoke to a small voice whispering in her room, "Cecilia, I'm in the front hall." Cecilia slipped out of bed and padded to the front hall, which led from the kitchen to the grand staircase. The doll was lying on the carpet, its gaze directed at Cecilia, who stood at the top of the staircase. Thinking perhaps her brother was performing some sort of trick on her, Cecilia shook her head and walked back to her bedroom. But then the voice returned, "Cecilia, I'm on the stairs. I'm on the first step. I'm on the second step. I'm on the third step." The voice continued until the very last step on the grand staircase. Cecilia crept outside to check, and sure enough, the doll was lying at the top of the stairs, its hollow eye staring straight at her. Truly frightened now, Cecilia ran to her room, locked the door, and dove under the covers. And still the voice continued, "Cecilia, I'm in your brother's room." There was a sudden scream of agony, followed by the sound of a body hitting the floor. Got him. Cecilia began to cry, her teeth tearing through her bottom lip as the voice went on, "Cecilia, I'm in your parents' room." Another set of screams followed. Got them. Cecilia listened in horror as her lock clicked and the door swung open. "Cecilia, I'm at your toes, I'm at your knees, I'm at your waist, I'm at your shoulders. Stop," I yelled, slamming my hands down on the table. The girl didn't look taken aback in the least at my outburst, instead gazing at me as though waiting to continue. "I demand you stop this right now," I growled. "This is a police station, not a campfire, and I'll have none of your tales here. I know very well that today is the mayor's daughter's birthday, and that they are all alive at this moment, so please kindly stop wasting my time." And I was interrupted by the door bursting open and the chief sergeant leaning in, policeman dashing backwards and forwards behind him. "Detective, we need you at Mayor Townsend's residence. Please come with me." I looked back to the chair and saw that the girl had slipped behind me and out the door. All my attention had been preoccupied. Gritting my teeth in frustration, I turned back to the chief and nodded, following him back through the station and into the sheeting rain. When we arrived at the mayor's house, the coroners were removing gurneys laden with bodies covered in blood-spattered sheets. One of the sheets was blown back in the wind, and I saw the mutilated face of Cecilia Townsend, her throat slashed into ribbons of flesh, and her mouth slit from ear to ear in a horrific grin. I felt bile rise in my throat and excused myself to empty my stomach behind the house. I was wiping my mouth when I heard the light tapping. And through the rain I glanced up and saw a figure standing in the upstairs window. its fingers played across the glass. Squinting, I could make out the outline of the girl from the police station, a large smile upon her usually deadpan face, and a doll with blonde ringlets clutched in her hand. She tapped on the glass again and began to write something on the window. When she was finished, she waved at me, her smile growing impossibly huge. Before disappearing into the room's shadows, I stepped closer and saw the words daub on the window in blood-red letters. Don't take my DOLL. Story 5. Don't wear contacts made by New Life Vision. I don't know about everyone else, but I have always had terrible vision. Generally, it gets worse from year to year, but there are some years I'm able to skip the decay. I wear contact lenses because I've tried to avoid the nerd stigma my whole life. I'm not entirely sure the contacts help though, but I prefer them regardless. As year my vision had definitely gotten worse. I could tell just by trying to read words from afar. I was almost out of contact lenses as well, so it was time to go see my optometrist. The visit went about as usual, doing a bunch of vision tests, getting bright lights shined in my eyes, and trying to guess what letter the big blur was. Once he asked me to take out my contacts, as suspected my vision had indeed gotten worse. When I asked my doctor about ordering new contacts, he offered me a strange proposal. This may seem weird, but I just received a new shipment of contacts today. This new company sent me an experimental set of contacts. To be blunt, I'm looking for a guinea pig to try them out on. That was a bit weird. New contacts. Do they match my prescription? I said, a bit confused. That's the thing. Apparently these contacts auto-adjust to the person wearing them. I have no clue how it works, but if it does, it would be an incredible stride for optometry. Your new contacts will take a few days to get here anyway, but if these work, you could be back to perfect vision today, the doctor replied. I didn't like the idea of being a guinea pig, especially after all the TV and movies I've watched where experiments don't end quite well. On the other hand, this sounded incredible. Contacts that automatically adjust to your eyes. I was just curious to see if such a thing existed. In the end, curiosity won out. I'll try them, I said. My optometrist quickly left the room with a grin and returned a few minutes later with a small bow X in one hand and a piece of paper in the other, which I quickly learned what the paper was for. I'm going to need you to sign this waiver. Like I said, they are experimental. Well, it looks like I won't be getting a big payday if something goes wrong, I thought as I signed the waiver. After getting that out of the way, the doctor set the box in front of me. New Life Vision. It read, helping you see a new outlook on life. What a cheesy slogan, I thought as I restrained myself from laughing out loud. I opened the small box and pulled out the even smaller two containers from within. If you've ever worn contacts before, you know what these containers look like. I was easily able to put both contacts in within a span of 30 seconds. At first it seemed like they didn't work. My vision was as blurry as it always is without contacts. After blinking a few times, however, they started to become clearer. Another few seconds passed and I blinked a few more times, and they worked. My vision was absolutely perfect. This is amazing, I said out loud without even realizing it. So they work then? The doctor asked questioningly. Yes, they work perfectly. I might even have better than 20/20th's vision now, I stammered out. The doctor laughed at this. He ran a few more tests to make sure the lenses were working right, and I passed them all with flying colors. Well, you're free to go. The lenses seem to be working just fine. Just be sure to check back in with me in a couple days. Oh, and one last thing, he said as he pulled out a few folded pieces of paper stapled together neatly. I'm supposed to give you these. They are instructions for the contacts. Anyway, have a good day. Why would I ever need instructions for contacts? I've never needed instructions before. I figure it was probably just notes on the contacts since they were experimental, so I accepted the papers. Once I got back to my car, I quickly stuffed the papers in my center console and went home. My first day with the contacts was incredible. As I had told the doctor, I'm pretty sure my vision surpassed even 20/20ths now. Everything was just so much more clear and focused. Colors even stood out more. I was almost hesitant when I removed them to go to sleep that night. I was actually a bit worried that the lenses wouldn't work the next day when I put them in. Just as before, after a few seconds, they worked more than perfect. Most of the day went on as normal, but something kept bugging me. You know that feeling you get when you swear you see something out of the corner of your eye, but when you turn to look, there's nothing there? Well, that feeling persisted for most of the day, but other than that it was all fine. For the third straight day, why, I woke up to put in my new miracle contacts. It was Saturday, so I would have the contacts for the rest of the weekend at least. I would report back to the eye doctor on Monday. The nagging feeling I had felt the previous day was even gone. I guess I had just been imagining things, or so I thought. Once again the day went on like any other day, until I decided to venture to go get some food. I had gone to my favorite burger joint and gotten some carry-out. I really don't like sitting in restaurants. As I was driving home, I never took my eyes off the road, not even for one quick text a few blocks from my house, though I did blink, a simple human action. In the time it took for that single blink to occur, there was now a man standing in the road. I slammed head on the brakes, sending my food flying from the passenger seat. The hood of my car was only inches from the man upon complete stop. I was about to jump out of my car to ask the man what the hell he was doing, but that was before I got a better look. I'm not sure I could call this thing a man. It was incredibly tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, but it was scrunched over like Gollum. It was also extremely slender, as if it were malnourished. Its skin was incredibly pale, almost completely white. Its head was to the side. As it was turning to look at me, I blinked once more, and it was gone. Of course, there was no one else around to tell me if there was actually something there, or if I was just insane. So I drove home to enjoy the rest of my meal that wasn't plattered on my dashboard. I took the contacts out and went to bed early that night. Even though it was Saturday, I figured I must just be sleep-deprived. It would just be better for me to rest. I almost skipped putting in the contacts the next morning in favor of an old pair of glasses, but the allure of the contacts was too much. It was Sunday. So, of course, it meant lazing around, flipping between full hot ball games. After a few hours of doing essentially nothing, I let out a yawn, closing my eyes in the process. When I opened my eyes, there was another figure in front of me. This one was S.H. Ort, probably about 4 feet tall. It too was hunched over, with the same slender and pale body. Its back was to me, so once again I couldn't see a face. I almost immediately closed my eyes in fear. When I gathered the courage to look again, just like before the figure was gone, I wasn't certain this was the solution at the time, but I sprinted to the bathroom anyway and removed the contacts. That's when I remembered the instructions. After removing the contacts, I stormed out to my car and retrieved the instructions I had ignored before. Those instructions read out a few guidelines that I was meant to follow. Here is what it read. If you begin to see figures, simply ignore them and blink once. They should disappear. If a figure appears in front of you, do not look at its face. Under no circumstances should you wear the contact lenses for more than 24 hours at a time. Should you break any of these guidelines, New Life Vision bears no responsibility for any trauma you may suffer, as outlined in the waiver you signed beforehand. That was essentially the important parts of the paper. If I had read this before, I would have never even worn the contacts. I immediately threw them away. There's something I haven't yet told you, though. I left out part of my story, mostly because I don't want to relive it. But I think it serves as an important warning. You see, when I went to remove the contacts, I saw another figure. It was standing behind me. When I looked in the mirror, its head was right next to me, and I saw its face. I won't describe what I saw, but just know it still haunts me to this day. These are more than just contact lenses. They will correct your vision and help you see better than you ever have before. However, there are some things we aren't meant to see in this world, something our eyes have evolved to block out for our own good. I never wore the contacts for more than 8 hours. I can only imagine what would happen if someone were to ignore the 24 hours guideline. Even now, I haven't worn the contacts in weeks, but sometimes I swear I still see the figure race out of the corners of my eyes. I've considered gouging my eyes out, but it wouldn't help. When I close my eyes, they are still there. Please take my advice. If your eye doctor offers you to try out some new contact lenses from New Life Vision, just say no. Story 6. How I Became a Japanese Urban Legend. Teka teka te tek. That is the sound of what is probably the creepiest of Japanese urban myth. Teek Teek is her name. It's typical that the Japanese would give the scariest of horror story creatures such a misleadingly stupid-sounding name. I would understand the horror of the creature as we lines anyone on account of the fact that I ran into her like a typical American skeptic. I didn't take to the Japanese folklore with much heed. After all, every story seemed to have the same moral. Don't go out after dark alone. Therefore, it was only natural to believe that the stories were only a system of keeping kids from wandering off. When one story was proved wrong or ignored, another and more exotic story was made up to keep the children enveloped in pant-sweating fear of wandering off. The stories range from that of the slit-mouthed woman to the impossibility of the 50-story skeleton that would gladly tear off your head and drink the blood from your system like you were a juice box. But there were always holes in the story, such as how in the world of Fee, story skeleton hasn't been spotted by more than one person at a time, or even how something that massive could ever sneak up on anyone. And even the story of the slit-mouthed woman has its problems. The story supposedly features a beautiful Japanese woman who angered her husband, who in turn sliced her mouth in his rage. Now she goes around with a scarf over her mouth asking people if she be beautiful or not. If you say no, she takes a giant pair of shears to you. If you say yes, she takes off her scarf and asks the same question again. At that point, you're pretty much screwed no matter what you say, unless you tell her she's so-so, and then make a run for it while she's contemplating what to do with that statement. However, it is never mentioned what happens if you see the giant pair of scissors on her back and just make a run for it before she asks you anything, or if you happen to be armed and just shoot the girl in the head at point-blank range the moment she talks off the scarf. The story of Teak Teak is similar in ways of plot holes. The story is about a girl who jumps, falls into a subway, and gets split in half. How she didn't get pulverized completely is anyone's guess. Afterward, her spirit gets royally ticked off at the world and chases down any poor sap she sees and cuts them in half. Her name is based off the noise she makes as she runs. Her long-nailed hands clack against the ground rapidly. Tek-a-tek-a-tek-tek. Even if dead spirits were able to interact with the real world, my question is why tech's so angry. I've seen plenty of people who had lost their legs in reality shows or whatever, and they seem pretty happy. And her tripping and falling into a railway station wasn't anyone's fault besides her own. Therefore, that myth seemed to contradict a rational human mindset. At least, that's what I thought, until I saw her torso sitting on a wall late one Friday evening. In a classic horror story fashion, it was incredibly dark, and I was walking home alone. Like I mentioned earlier, I did not take much of the surrounding folklore seriously. I actually thought it was a full-sized girl for the longest time. If I had known that she was the ultimate concentration of horrific, mutilating nightmare fuel, I probably wouldn't have approached her so carelessly to ask if she was all right. However, my the intentions change to a furious rush of terror when she jerked violently at the sound of my voice and hopped off of the wall. Before she even hit the ground, I clearly saw that most of the bottom portion of her was missing. She scurried toward me like an angered spider, making indistinguishable groaning and shrieking sounds as she raced toward me. That's when I took off like a scared pup. Why? Who wouldn't? I am a very fast runner. The undeniable fact has been mentioned several times to me by my peers ever since middle school. I would have stopped running after the first few minutes if I had managed to leave whatever was chasing me behind, but the noise did not subside. In fact, as I ran, it grew steadily louder. Tek-a-tek-a-tek-tek. The possibility of this being an insanely well-configured prank had crossed my mind several times. I had asked for this elaborate joke the moment I bragged to all of my friends that ghost stories didn't scare me or that I didn't believe in ghosts. However, the way that the creature moved and how fast it went and how impossible it is to pull off something like this without Hollywood effects or circus creatures, I really had little to believe except the fact that Teak Teak happened to main character of an all-too-true story. But during my rambling and strangely calm train of thought, I noticed something. I got my feet to finally stop and listen. The clicking noise had stopped. A gust of wind swirled around the corners of the alley and wrapped around my feet. Suddenly a bolt of movement shot past the corner of my eye. Take. I turned around at the strange spurt of the horrendous clicking. However, the moment I focused my ears in to find out where the spectre had run, to the clicking quit, I listened to what was now dead and ominous silence. The type of quiet that would play out in a horror movie before some corpse fell out of the ceiling with its eyes sliced out of the sockets and its mouth hanging open in a ghastly scream. Take. I turned back at the spurt of sounds again. My heart pounded so hard I felt like I was going to go unconscious. I should just get out of here, I thought to myself. That was perhaps a bad idea on account of a probable inability to watch my own back. Mindless dashing would serve. However, my body instantly obeyed, and I took off as I rounded the corner. I was stopped by the short and legless figure of Teak, who stood on her hands no more than a few feet away from me. My heart leapt up, slamming into my throat and expelling a gag. At the sound of my gag, Teak looked into my eyes. In the light of a street lamp, I actually got a glimpse of her face and means of symmetric, all features and a well-shaped nose. She was actually a very lovely girl. However, the sheer panic of the situation made the beauty matter very little to me. But the scariest thing was, when I gagged, I swear that the pupils of her eyes grew until the whites disappeared from her sockets when she turned and faced me. She raced at me while I attempted to start running again. Lurched like a fierce predator toward my lower torso with both of her hands outstretched. It was unreal how far she was able to jump. I screamed and swatted her as best as I could to the side. I very well managed not cut in half, but her claw made a large gash in my side, just above the pelvis. I yelled as the blood began to pour out of my side, and in a terribly unintelligent motion I flopped down onto the ground, onto my back as I bled. By that time Teak had shaken off my blow and leapt onto my form as I lay on my back. It was at that point that I switched from mildly intelligent survivalist to mindless panicked child. I shrieked and twisted violently to shake her off. Most of what happened during that time was a blur. A bunch of pained slashes of claws and blood till my face was blinded by It was almost a surreal nightmare. It was a surreal nightmare. Every feeling of panic and terror that you'd feel when being attacked by an angry dog was multiplied by the fact that this unhappy and vengeful creature was less than a dog and far more frightening. I must have blacked out because suddenly I came to my senses in a railway station. Everything was still blackened, horrendously dark, but I was able to see my hands and a few faint glows of shattered advertising signs. I was unable to recall how I got into the railway station in the first place. I could have crawled here in my wounded state, or Teak could have dragged me here. However, my memory at that point was fuzzy and unreliable. I checked behind my back, and my spine crunched as my torso turned a full 180 degrees. When I looked behind me, it didn't hurt, but it produced a strange feeling of relief, like popping your back in a violent manner. I didn't mean to turn myself around in such a grotesque manner, but it didn't terrify me as much as one would suspect such an odd manner When I straightened myself with another abnormal crunch, I examined myself and unintentionally reminded myself of the gash that was laid upon my side by Teak. Now I was able to view the thing in full potential. It was cut all the way from front to back in a clean slice, however. No blood poured from the wound. That was the final revelation that I need to know why I had been left alone. I'm dead, I thought to myself, still far too shaken to break the silence of the railway station by verbalizing my thoughts. The horror quite at that time, for the revelation that death wasn't quite as terrible as I thought it was, still sinking in slowly. However, I was quickly distracted by the sight of a young woman walking down a far more well-lit path far from me, not noticing my huge form standing stiffly in the shadows. I was overwhelmed with the feeling that it was my inner purpose to hurt her. I moved toward the girl, my spine moving unnaturally and my torso twisting on and off of my pelvis, with a large gash that kept the upper part of my body half holding on. Story 7. Me of the Shadow Man. The game of the Shadow Man is one of the earliest forms of demonic summoning rituals known in urban legend, dating as far back as 1200 AD. The ritual has gone under many other titles, the most popular being the Boogeyman ritual, Satan's shadow, or simply the dark summoning. Many forms of the summoning ritual have come and passed. Months resulted in more failures than results, while others simply passed into obscurity. This version, however, is one of the remaining few that yields results. This tutorial will act as your personal guide on how to perform the game of the Shadow Man before enacting the ritual. It is best noted by past reports that the summoner, you the reader in this case, must be first informed on what the Shadow Man is to bet. Understand what you are dealing with. The title Shadow Man is simply a description of what the being is, a tall, shadowy, humanoid figure. The true name of this creature is unknown, though through conversation with the being it tends to give a variety of names. It refers to itself as the most prominent name. It calls itself by simply Shadow. The being is a tall, lanky figure, pairing masculine in nature. Its skin, a pale gray, is referred to as rotting, while alive in appearance, and its hair is a thick ebony black mass. It is always described as wearing a gray or black cloak that covers up everything but its head and hands. However, its hair always covers its eyes as well, making it impossible to see if the figure even has eyes. Furthermore, the nose is described as abnormally sharp, and the mouth is a sharp-toothed smile, with lips described as charred skin. The hands of the figure are tipped with a strange black ashy substance from the foremost bend in the finger to the tip, and is sharpened to a pointed end. Now that the being has been identified, the ritualistic process can begin. There are 3 steps to the process: the preparation, execution, and the resolution. First, the preparation. Before the actual ritual can take place, certain forms of preparation must occur. First, acquire access to a decently sized room. Hat, when closed off, will be completely dark. No light must be able to get into the room during the entirety of the ritual, else it will yield no results. Due to this, it is preferred to act during the darkest hours of the night for the best results. This is to give Shadow a place to access during the ritual. Second, grab a pencil and a piece of paper, not a mechanical pencil, but a genuine number to wooden pencil. Take them both and draw out your best self-portrait. It seems that realism and details do not matter to the execution, as even a simple stick figure yield the same result as after you finish the picture. No matter how good or bad it is, scratch out the eyes with the same pencil. Make it as thick and dark as possible. Make sure the eyes are completely blotted out and cannot be seen. This is to allow a shadow to have a form, as most claimers detail it is very similar in appearance to themselves. Added with this, find any piece of clothing that you have worn for at least a month or so. This is to add another layer to the formation of shadow, and sadly, you will be losing this article of clothing in the process. If it's something that comes in pairs, use both. Third and finally, acquire 12 identical candles. This will be both your portal and defense against shadow. And further details about how this will be used are explained later. The following must also be obtained and will be used during the execution process: a candle lighter, a sharp object, preferably a knife, a pair of gloves, and socks to wear black in. Printer or pen ink is fine, though a decent amount is needed. Now that you have obtained all necessary items, it is time to begin the ritual. Start by going into the selected room and measuring out a space wide enough to perform with. The best way to test is to stick your arms out to your side and spin in a circle. If you hit nothing or nothing gets in the way, you have enough room. It is okay before you begin to have light in the room to see what you are doing. Begin placing your candles in the circle space you measured out, each spread out equally apart. And once they have been set, light them all up. Now close off any light to the room. Make the room entirely sectioned off to just itself with no outside connection. Go to your circle of candles and, using the ink, put out the fur on every other candle for better reference. Imagine the candles like a clock and put out the ones placed at the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11 spots. This is the beginning of the ritualistic process, and as said in reports, this is the portal for shadow to enter through. If at any moment you wish to back out, simply light up one of the dead candles. However, whatever you do, do not have more candles out than on. These candles are your one safety net, and if you make a mistake, it will not end well. Continuing forward, make sure you have your gloves and socks both on as an added layer of protection. Even with the candle circle, it is very important you have a layer of clothing as well. Take the pre-selected article of clothing you wish to use, set it in the middle of circle, taking heed not to distort or destroy the circle, and stain it with the remainder of your ink. Following that, take up your sharp object and cut a diagonal line from the top to the bottom. Once you have done that, slip in the drawing you had made from earlier into the clothing. If it is too small to fit inside, simply lay the drawing on top. Now burn it. Take the lighter and burn the drawing. You won't need your sharp object for any other reason afterwards. And as said before, your lighter can be used if you wish to back out during the ritual. However, if you do back out, never attempt the ritual again. Now, the next stage is one that requires the most direct influence. While the picture is burning, stand back and begin to think of one particular thing. Think of things you despise. things you find horrid and disgusting, things you could harm or kill over. Focus on these thoughts, and all the while, say the word shadow. It's not so much a chant, but you will need to repeat that word over and over again. Slowly, the room around you will shift. It will turn from black and white to crimson and magenta. The air will seem ashy and stale. Hardy to breath properly, and from the center of your candle circle, a figure will begin to rise. That is shadow. You will know when it has fully entered when the room suddenly goes quiet, even if it was already silent to begin with. It will oddly become even more so. Focus your attention now on shadow. This is where the final stage comes into play. You have brought it into your realm to make a deal with it. So long as you are aware of everything, you and it both say you can converse as you please. There is no penalty in conversation, and you can talk for however long you would like. The ultimate deciding factor is the deal it provides. You can ask Shadow for anything you desire: fame, fortune, even murder. You can be as simple or as descriptive as possible. However, you must be aware of what is said for both sides of the bet. Make sure anything you bet for and have to pay for is not a major harm to you. Following your request, Shadow will raise its hand to you to shake in confirmation of its deal. So long as you have your gloves, do not worry, and take its hand. Before you even realize it, Shadow will have disappeared, the ritual will have been completed, and while it may not come immediately, your reward will eventually be provided. But there is one more thing you must take care of: the gloves. Immediately strip them off and throw them into the circle. Set fire to them, light all the candles on fire. Do anything you can to discard of your evidence. Shadow knows of what you've done, but so long as you have destroyed the evidence, it cannot track you. From this point, you will have successfully won the game of the Shadow Man. You are free to live your life as you please without fear of consequence. What you wished for will come to you naturally. If it was money, you will get bonuses and raises at your job unexpectedly. If it was fame, word of you will get around very quickly, and people will take a lick towards you overall. That being said, a few individuals may still be questioning something in this process. What would happen if you were to fail? If you retried the ritual after a previous attempt, failed a step in the execution, or did not get rid of the evidence, what would have happened? The details of failure are blurry, mainly because not many people who fail are alive to tell the tale. However, there have been a few select reports that detail what might just happen. It is said that when someone fails, the consequences are not immediately noticeable. It may startle as a voice or a visual problem, but soon you will start to notice strange changes in your life, changes that will affect your mind. Most reports show once healthy people developing symptoms of schizophrenia and PTSD after failure, but the worst part is not during the waking hours. This was of only one report, but it is said that dreams are something like a trip to hell, and you can feel and hear it all. No further reports are known of those who have failed. All people who have failed were claimed dead no longer than a week after attempting the ritual.